그럼 지금부터 2022 한반도 국제평화 포럼의 2-1 세션을
Session
시작하도록
2-1 of the Korea Global Forum for Peace 2022.
기획 세션, 북한 비핵화 해법
The title of this session is Seeking a Solution to Denuclearize North Korea, and it will be held in the form of a panel discussion. The moderator of this session is Mr. Seong-ho, Professor of Graduate School of International Studies at Seoul National University. With that, I would like to hand the floor over to Mr. Shin. It's very nice to meet you. As introduced, my name is Shin Seong-ho. I'm the moderator for this session. In this session, we will talk about the theme titled Seeking a Solution to Denuclearize North Korea. We have experts from Korea, Japan, the United States, and China to share their personal opinions on this very topic. Not just their personal opinions, but also the solutions by their respective countries. The panelists who are here today are top experts in their respective fields, and you already see their CVs inside the event booklet, so I'm not going to go over that. Instead, let's jump right into the presentations first, and afterwards, we will take questions from the floor as well as from our online audiences. Not just questions, but also comments. Without further ado, let me introduce the first speaker. He's a Senior Vice President for Asia and Korea Chair at CSIS, and he's also the Vice Dean and DSong KF Professor of Government at Georgetown University. Mr. Victor Cha will give us his first presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Shin. First, let me just thank the organizers, the Ministry of Unification, for hosting the Korea Global Forum. This is because of the pandemic, my first trip to Korea since September of 2019. So it's been a long time, and it's good to be back in Seoul. I'm going to make 5 points with regard to the question of seeking a solution to denuclearizing North Korea. The first point is related to the objective of North Korea's current campaign of ballistic missile and potentially nuclear weapons testing. I think the objective is very simple, which is that North Korea is seeking to demonstrate an ability to overwhelm the U.S. national missile defense system by demonstrating not just the long-range ICBM capability, but also demonstrating the ability to put multiple warheads on a missile, the ability to have what are called maneuverable reentry vehicles, increasing the number of launchers, to a point where, mathematically speaking, it's very hard for the U.S. national missile defense system, even with scheduled upgrades, to be able to successfully defend against a large number of North Korean missiles. As I said, the U.S. does have plans to modernize this system, but at least in my estimation, that is a race that North Korea is on pace to win, because it's just developing capabilities much more quickly. I think related to this, the United States' focus these days, unfortunately, is not on North Korea. The focus is on the war in Europe and the impact of the war on Europe on China's ambitions with regard to Taiwan. That's where most of the focus is, even though the North Korea situation is quite serious. Second point is that because the North Korean campaign seems unstoppable at the moment. This makes extended deterrence a paramount concern for the alliance relationship. This is often what you hear talked about in Washington these days, is the concerns about extended deterrence. The fact that this is the most important thing that most people in Korea who work on the alliance speak about is a sign of, or a reflection of the fact that there is not much confidence in denuclearization of North Korea anytime soon. And that, for that reason, the focus is now on living with a nuclear North Korea, which means improving extended deterrence capabilities. In my view, extended deterrence is about two things. One of them is about military capabilities, and the other is about political will and political signaling, political reassurance. In my opinion, the political reassurance part is actually more important for extended deterrence credibility than the capabilities part. I think some marginal upgrading of capabilities is important, but what's really important are the symbols that, political symbols that the United States can reassure South Korea of extended deterrence. We're actually working on a report at CSIS right now on the question of extended deterrence, where we're going to offer some recommendations on this. Third point is that I do not think that a nuclear South Korea is in any way going to help resolve or help, according to the title of this session, I don't think a nuclear South Korea is a solution to denuclearizing North Korea. The talk about nuclear South Korea is much more in the mainstream today than it has ever been in the past. But I don't think that that really is the answer, certainly not at this point. The idea of a nuclear South Korea would essentially be admitting defeat in terms of the diplomacy to try to denuclearize North Korea. It would be, it would be admitting defeat in terms of diplomacy. It would be expressing a lack of confidence in Korea's own kill chain and their own missile defense capabilities. It would be something that, it would be a classic security dilemma for those of you who do international relations, in the sense that it might be an action that Koreans take to make themselves more secure, but in the end will make themselves less secure. By heightening tension on the peninsula, by creating, again, to use IR theory terms, by creating stability and instability paradoxes, by creating crisis instability and possible use or lose incentives for North Korea. It's bad in many different ways. So I don't think, that's my third point, I don't think a nuclear South Korea is the answer. Fourth point is that sanctions are important, but they're not the silver bullet, or they're not the answer. There's some who believe that more sanctions is the best way to try to get North Korea to denuclearize. This perception is partly reinforced by the February 2019 summit in Hanoi, in which the North Korean leader expressed a desire to see sanctions lifting to President Trump, in particular the 2016-2017 UN sanctions. But at the same time, more sanctions don't stop testing, because we put a lot of sanctions on North Korea and they're still testing. So more sanctions don't stop testing. More sanctions, because they don't stop testing, they're not stopping development, because testing leads to development. And clearly sanctions are not denuclearizing North Korea, because we have lots of sanctions on North Korea and they're not denuclearizing In fact, the lockdown in North Korea because of COVID, now for over 2.5 years, is about the most severe self-sanctioning that North Korea could have ever done to itself by shutting down the border with China. And of course, this has not led to any change in North Korea's position on denuclearization. If anything, their position on denuclearization has hardened. So that leads to my fifth and final point, which is that leaves us only with negotiations. That is all we have. Let me see if I can get this to work. Oh yeah, so I brought some charts with me. Negotiations are all we have. For one, when we are negotiating with North Korea, they do less testing, right? So this is a time series of, this is 1990 to 2000. The red lines indicate North Korean weapons testing. The blue lines indicate negotiations between the US and North Korea. This is a timeline at the bottom. This is 1990 to 2000. This is 2000 to 2008, so you can see basically the ratio of provocations to negotiations. Again, red is the provocations, blue is the negotiation. And then this one is the most obvious, which is 2009 to 2020. So this period represents the Obama administration's strategic patience policy of no negotiations with North Korea, and the first year of the Trump administration and the last year of the Trump administration, where you clearly see that the blue lines have disappeared, very little negotiation, and then you clearly see there's a lot of provocations. And this one blue area here represents the summit meetings, Singapore and Hanoi, the summit meetings, the 2 years of summit meetings that took place. But you can clearly see that when we're negotiating with North Korea, they generally do less testing. This is obviously correlational, it's not causal, but they do less testing. When they do less testing, that retards their development, and it leaves opportunities or openings for piecemeal negotiation. This is not entirely satisfying from the perspective of a policymaker or a negotiator. I was a former negotiator during the six-party talks. This is not a particularly appetizing way to think about how to denuclearize North Korea, but there really is no substitute for some sort of negotiation. Now, clearly right now at this point, North Korea is not interested in that based on their lack of response to any efforts by the Biden administration, and there have been many efforts by the Biden administration to reach out to North Korea, and Kim Yo-jong's response to the audacious initiative clearly signals that there's no interest at this point, but there could be at some point in the future. The last point I wanted to make, and I wanted to show you, is while I think negotiations and diplomacy are important, I do not believe that leading with a peace assurance or peace initiative or peace treaty is the answer. I don't think that's where diplomacy should start. This is a data set of all the security assurances that the United States has given to North Korea, going back to the George H.W. Bush administration through Reagan, through H.W. Bush, Clinton, George W. Bush, Obama, and Trump and Biden. If you look at the number here, there have been 76 peace assurances, security assurances, statements of non-hostile intent that have been given by a U.S. president, a U.S. Secretary of State, or a U.S. National Security Advisor to North Korea. In fact, the United States North Korea is by far the only country that has received this many, 76 statements of non-hostile intent of any U.S. adversary in the world, in the history of the United States. No country has received more negative security assurances than North Korea. And as you can clearly see, there have been 76 of them, and it has not helped us. It has not gotten us any closer to denuclearization. So while I think diplomacy is important, I don't think that leading with a peace regime or a peace declaration is the right way to go. Largely because it has not worked. We've seen that it's not worked. So in conclusion, I think that we are back to trying to find some sort of opportunity for diplomacy. It's not going to happen right now, very clearly from the lack of a North Korean response. Some people think that the next opportunity will be after they conduct their 7th nuclear test. They might be more ready to try to engage from a position of strength. And if that's the case, then all parties need to be prepared to engage at that point, to try to at least slow down the pace of the testing and the weapons development campaign that they are now engaged in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cha. And next, 다음은 우리 그 일본 게이오 대학 교회 교수 겸 한반도 연구센터 센터장
Director of Keio Center for Contemporary Korean Studies and Professor at Keio University, Mr. NISHINO Junya.
교수님은 아시겠지만 한국말을 굉장히
So,
잘하기 때문에
Mr. NISHINO Junya is very fluent in Korea, so for the Korean audience, he is going to make his presentation in Korean.
네, 감사합니다. 일본 게이오 대학교의 니시노라고.
Thank you very much. I am Nishino
먼저
from Keio
토의를
University,
비롯한
Japan.
주최
First of all, I would like to thank the organizer, the
그리고
Ministry
오늘
of
이렇게
Unification, for
훌륭한,
organizing today's forum.
멤버분들,
And I am
교수님,
extremely honored to be joined by Professor Shin and Dr. Yang and Professor Victor Cha and Dr. Lee Nan
정말 영광으로
to
생각을 합니다.
attend this distinguished panel session. So, Professor Cha mentioned that it's his first visit to Korea since the pandemic. For me, it's been also 5 years, and I would have loved to also talk a lot with Professor Cha, but I heard that you would have to go back quickly. Anyways, since the Hanoi summit in 2019 and its failure, the situation indeed has aggravated. But actually, since the onset of the Ukrainian war, we are talking less and less about denuclearization of North Korea. And I think that is indeed a grave situation. So our ultimate goal should be to make sure that North Korea does not use its nuclear capability, that it does not expand its nuclear arsenal, and we have to make sure that these proposals are fulfilled so that ultimately we can stop North Korea from developing more nuclear weapons. And of course, for the time being, we have to strengthen nuclear deterrence, but at the same time, we have to seek dialogue and negotiation. That is evident. In order to engage in negotiations and engage in dialogue, since North Korea wants direct talk with the U.S., first of all, we can think about a potential negotiation or dialogue between the U.S. and North Korea before closing the deal on the nuclearization. That will be the desirable path for us to take. But for the time being, U.S., Korea, and Japan trilateral cooperation is the key. Since the war in Ukraine, we are seeing a more divided world. So North Korea is closer to Russia and China. And in this situation, U.S., Japan, and Korea need to cooperate and collaborate further.
한미일 3국 건조를 하기 위해서는
When it comes to the trilateral cooperation, I repeatedly say the following. I believe that there are three important points to consider. First of all, for denuclearization and to address the North Korean issue, we need a common roadmap, and we need to develop a common roadmap and share this roadmap. South Korea's Yoon's administration recently announced an audacious initiative, and it is indeed a sort of a framework for denuclearization. And in order to implement this initiative for denuclearization, collaboration from the United States and Japan is the key. So in this perspective, we need policy coordination strengthened among our three countries. Fortunately, since the launch of the Biden administration and also of the Yoon administration, the trilateral dialogue has been further promoted. Since May, a lot of channels have been leveraged to promote dialogue between the three countries. I think that we have to continue with this trend. When it comes to the global roadmap or international roadmap, we may have to consider many different things. But in order for North Korea to be engaged in the process of denuclearization, I personally believe that Yeonbyeon facilities should be declared and dismantled ultimately. North Korea should commit to the declaration and dismantlement of Yeonbyeon facilities, because this agenda has been already agreed on by the Moon administration and Kim Jong-un. Of course, there could be opposition, but I believe that Yeonbyeon facilities should be dismantled to a certain point so that we can facilitate the process of denuclearization for North Korea and maybe also lift partially the sanctions against North Korea. Recently, within the United States, there has been a more flexible approach talked. So if the ICBM launch is stopped, then and the nuclear test is stopped, then the sanctions could be lifted. But I think that is not a progressive approach. I think one of the negotiators said this. And the reason we're hearing this is because of the situation that we are faced with today. So I think that we have to go for more a fundamental approach. We have to initiate a dialogue, negotiation with North Korea. And in 2019, I think that this approach is much more flexible than the approach presented by Trump in 2019. So, for the time being, we need a strengthened deterrence. With the Yoon's administration, we are focusing very much on extended deterrence. As for Japan, we are revising three important reports or documents regarding the national security. And there is an important capability. For example, we need to have the ability to be able to attack, intervene or intercept North Koreans' provocations or attacks. So we are trying to revamp our defense capability system. And if Japan does so, of course, there will be a lot of opposition from South Korea, a lot of concerns coming from South Korea. But if Japan revamped its defense posture and defense system, actually, I think that our goal is the same as South Korea, because we want to actually strengthen our defense posture against North Korea. So I think that South Korea and Japan should put their heads together to effectively deal with this situation. So that is why the US, South Korea, and Japan, our three countries, should work together on the military exercises such as the interception of missiles and so forth. This is the direction that we need to take going forward. All of these efforts should be made visible and transparent to the people of our three countries. Last but not least, I would like to move on to the other issue, that is the issue of human rights. President Yoon recently appointed the North Korean Human Rights International Corporation ambassador from South Korea. Biden administration said that he would also appoint the counterpart. So there is an growing interest in North Korea's human rights issue. The more we deal with North Korea's human rights issues, the more North Korea would revolt. But even in this situation, the three countries, United States, Japan, and Korea, should get together and discuss how to have to build a roadmap regarding the North Korea's human rights issues. Thank you very much.
Next, we will hear from Mr. Yang Yu, Associate Research Fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Thank you very much. As introduced, my name is Yang Woo. So North Korea's denuclearization issue has never been taken lightly by any administrations here in Korea. As you know, we have done everything that we can. We engaged in dialogue, negotiations. We had some coercive rhetorics. We did so many things, but we never even came close to denuclearization. Even the summit between Kim Jong-un and Trump was actually a diplomatic victory for North Korea and also the US, but that did not yield to concrete outcome. So is North Korea's denuclearization possible? There may be two cases. One is that North Korea gives up its nuclear program on its own, or two, some other forces outside would intervene to force North Korea to give it up. For North Korea to give up its own nuclear weapons voluntarily is impossible, because we've seen many speeches, reports by media outlets, and even Kim Jong-un's own remarks and address that North Korea does not have the willingness to give up its nuclear program. Then let's move on to the second option. So maybe some internal disruption in North Korea can happen, but there is actually no powerful forces who can overthrow the Kim Jong-un regime. So that's out of the question. And so then next is maybe a regime change by outsiders. The international community, including Korea, South Korea, and the United States, have imposed sanctions to pressurize North Korea, but they too have their limits. Now, against this backdrop, the South Korean government presented what it calls the audacious initiative. Will North Korea also accept this initiative with an audacious attitude? And many people expect that the answer would be no. Yes, indeed, the initiative lacks enough leveraging power. However, we have a conservative government, and perhaps this could serve as a new starting point or a new trigger. So even the previous administration, which was rather amicable towards North Korea, failed in its policy for North Korea. So this may suggest that approaching North Korea by being divided into camps, two camps, for example, is not going to work. The governments of the two Koreas must build trust first and engage in dialogue. So we have to go back to that. And in that sense, the audacious initiative can be very significant because at least both North and South Koreas can share the value that we can indeed build trust and engage in dialogue. And this audacious initiative, the contents of it is very different from other conservative governments, which always said denuclearization first and compensation later. The new initiative is very forward-looking. If North Korea shows its willingness to denuclearize, then we will take step-by-step measures to provide assistance from the initial negotiation process. So the approach is rather different from other conservative governments. But what has North Korea emphasized continuously? No matter what economic assistance you provide to us, we will not renounce our nuclear program. Let's say that the United Nations eases its sanctions. Do you think North Korea will still give up its nuclear program? I don't think so. Then in the end, we will not be able to help but to recognize North Korea as a nuclear-armed state. So what should we do in this situation? Am I saying that let's give up because denuclearization is impossible? That's not my point. The significance of the audacious initiative or the principle that it implies is that the South Korean government will not shake up North Korea artificially or forcefully. That's a very important point of the initiative. Changing the status quo by force is not something that South Korea pursues, and that's also another key. Whether it be the audacious initiative or other initiatives or plans or strategies, the approach by the current administration, in order for it to have a leveraging power, this is the key. Now, in order for South Korea to be on par with North Korea to induce denuclearization. Because so far, North Korea has declared that or indicated that it needs to engage in dialogue with the United States because it's a nuclear-armed state. Many people think that that indicates denuclearization of the North Korea, but what Kim Jong-un aimed for through his dialogue with Trump, former President Trump, is nuclear disarmament. And its logic was same with China's logic that unless all other countries in the world denuclearize, we will not denuclearize as well. And so therefore, South Korea cannot be a counterpart of North Korea when it comes to denuclearization talks, as argued by North Korea. So in order for us to become audacious, and in order for us to become the counterpart of North Korea, we must do something. So what can we do? Am I saying that we should develop our own nuclear weapons? That's not what I'm saying. But at least, minimally, from the viewpoint of North Korea, when it comes to nuclear issues, South Korea is not the right counterpart. So we need to make efforts to make sure that North Korea recognizes South Korea as a counterpart. And in that regard, confidence building, trust building is really important. So far, dialogue and negotiations between the two Koreas have always just presented some outcomes, visible outcomes that they can flaunt, but whether they are really effective or not is another question. They're having some lack of effectiveness in terms of inter-Korean dialogue. So we need something that would allow us to verify that trust is indeed being built between the two Koreas, and that would be the starting point for the denuclearization talks. And I believe that the current administration will take relative steps towards that direction. Thank you. Thank you very much for the comment. Now, I am the next presenter. So after my presentation, we will hear from Professor or Dr. Lina. So I would appreciate it, Dr. Lina, if you could wait just a moment. Now, with regards to denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, in relation to the audacious initiative presented by the Yoon government, the Korean government would have to take lead in resolving issues concerning North Korea. So scholars from the United States and China say that the US-Sino conflict is becoming intensified, and against this backdrop, engaging in bilateral relations is very difficult, and the political landscape is also very complex as well, with pandemic and with the Ukraine-Russian war, that the U.S. administration does not have any reason to focus intensely on Korean Peninsula issues. And also, North Korea and China are also still cooperating closely. And for the time being, we do not see anything like the six-party talks happening soon. So people remain very pessimistic, and I agree to some extent. Then the problem is it would be okay if North Korea does not do anything, but we are expecting the 7th nuclear test to be conducted sometime. And North Korea, it seems, is also will pursue coercive or hawkish policy towards United States and South Korea, including military provocations. Then, in that case, what should be the strategies and policies for the South Korean government? So when we look at the response principles of international politics, there are three things. First is credibility. That we will not succumb to North Korea's military provocations, and we would also have to effectively respond to North Korea's provocations to show North Korea that provocations are ineffective. So our response capabilities, our own defense capability plus the ROK-US alliance plays a key role in that. And extended deterrence. The commitment by both sides for extended deterrence is also the key, as said by Mr. Cha. And based on that confidence, the second principle is proportionality. Now, if an all-out warfare breaks out on the Korean Peninsula, if we think about the worst-case scenario, there is a high possibility that South Korea will win the warfare. However, the war will still wreak havoc on not just North Korea but South Korea. So we must be very precautious in approaching North Korea so that a war will not break out. So with regards to North Korea's various provocations, including nuclear tests, we will have to make proportional countermeasures rather than taking extreme military measures that would aggravate the situation. And we should also refrain from making aggressive political comments or rhetorics as well. And lastly, reciprocity is the third principle. As said by the previous panelists, we can call this mutual reciprocity, and this is very important. And this issue can be addressed through diplomatic means. And here, so what we are saying is that we're not just going to unilaterally make a request, but we will mutually put on the table what each other wants.
우리 윤 정부에서 내놓은 담대한
And
구상이라는 것이
the audacious initiative by the Yoon administration,
첫 번째 스텝.
I believe, was the correct first step.
비핵화를 요구하는 것뿐만이 아니고
It not only demanded denuclearization from North Korea, but it said that if North Korea does make progress, then we will provide various economic assistance,
담당자가 설명하였듯이 거기에 경제뿐만 아니라 군사
and not just economic assistance, but we also have a roadmap for political and military affairs as well. We do not know the details yet, but the initiative covers both the economy, politics, and military. So, with regards to three principles that I talked about, the audacious initiative encompasses all those three principles.
스스로 얘기했듯이 그런 차원에서 또한 그 이전 그 비핵 개방 3층과 같은
And the Lee Myung-bak administration
거절을 했지만
presented what it calls the Vision 3000, denuclearization and openness, which the North Korea rejected. And unlike Vision 3000,
입장을 내놓은 것도 일단
we are going to engage in discussions with North Korea and give them corresponding
어떻게 받아들일지
assistance step by step, simultaneous with the progress that North Korea makes. But North Korea has not yet responded positively to the initiative. I know that is the reality,
혼자만의 그러한 이니셔티브만
but
가지고는
South Korea's initiative alone will not be enough to persuade North Korea. What's the most important for North Korea is the stance of the United States.
경제적 보상이 됐든
Whether it be economic compensation or political compensation, the United States
그것이 가장 기본적인 입장이다.
would have to
이 경우
be willing to provide something to North Korea. At least that's what North Korea thinks. That's what North Korea wants.
굉장히 긴밀한 정책
Therefore,
협의를
close policy coordination and consultation will be needed between South Korea and the U.S. to persuade North Korea together.
그렇게 한다면 여전히 물론
If that is the case,
구체적인 면에서 여러 가지 논의가 있을 수 있겠지만
of course, specifics will still have to be engaged in depth.
차 교수님께서 말씀
And as said by Mr. Cha,
당장 그걸
the peace regime, peace agreement, peace treaty, those are not going to be the correct solutions. But
경제적인 제재, 유엔을 통한 것이든
economic sanctions, whether it be the UN sanctions or the US independent sanctions, if we can
그런 입장을 가질 수 있다.
add flexibility,
같이 논의를 해서
or if we can at least show North Korea by discussing together that we can show some flexibility with regards to sanctions, then we would raise the probability of North Korea showing up at the negotiation table. And for that, our first goal is freezing of North Korea's nuclear program. It will be very difficult for us to discuss denuclearization right away from the onset. So freezing North Korea's nuclear program might be the first step, and then we would take step-by-step measures for denuclearization. And as we do so, we will implement related policies and plans like the audacious initiative. So thank you very much for listening. That's the end of my presentation. And next presenter or speaker is Mr. Lee Nan, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of American Studies at Chinese Academy of Social Sciences.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor SHEEN. And first of all, I would like to thank the Ministry of Unification for inviting me to this wonderful forum. And so many distinguished scholars from the world on Korean issue come together and communicate. And it's my very regretful that I can now visit Seoul. I have been there for 3 years. And so hope to join the event next year if I can go to the Seoul. And I'd like to talk about the North Korea's nuclear issue. First one, I'd like to talk, my point is why there's no general ability to secure a deal with the DPRK. And there's there has been a admission inside either US or DPRK that the other side had violated all agreements since DPRK-US agreed framework in 1990s. All the agreements signed between the United States and DPRK have not been effectively implemented, so that United States and DPRK have been extremely cautious when signing any new agreement in the foreseeable future and doubt the other party's intention. The United States believes the DPRK has always deceived the international community and will never give up nuclear weapon. DPRK, however, believes the United States will not abandon its hostile policy against them, even if the United States verbally promises. Not only that, but the United States and DPRK also do not trust the neighboring country to stand on their side. The United States believes DPRK is puppet of China, and only by putting pressure on China can force DPRK submit. DPRK also doesn't trust the security guarantee of neighboring country, and is unwilling to entrust its destiny to major powers. Therefore, it's difficult for neighboring countries to actively participate in the dialogue between United States and DPRK. From the Clinton administration to Trump administration, the US and DPRK have undergone long-term attempts through bottom-up and top-down without success, largely because the bureaucracy at both sides and a rigid conception on the other side, such as ideology and preconceived convictions, largely hinder the bilateral interaction with flexibility. And so that's why I visited Pyongyang 3 times right after the Singapore Declaration, and I really realized the bureaucracy in Pyongyang never understands what Kim Jong's side and why North Korea drop up the nuclear weapon and what the new role of the US. So I think the bureaucracy still cannot very fully understand what Kim Jong-un's promise in Singapore. So that's why you can see the working team between United States and DPRK always have problem. So for the Biden administration, how to evaluate the Singapore Declaration is very important starting point for the future development of US-DPRK relations. The Singapore Declaration defines a new model of US-DPRK relations. It is a framework document approved by the top leaders of the US and DPRK. If it is easily abandoned, it means the DPRK-US relations would return to the original circles. And for the neighboring country, so right now I think it's necessary to maintain the atmosphere of dialogue between the United States and DPRK, conducting crisis management, preventing emergence of sudden crises such as human rights issue. At the same time, the neighboring countries should effectively involve the dialogue between the DPRK and the United States at a appropriate time and make recommendations to both sides. So I think engagement with DPRK requires effective coordination between top-down and bottom-up. So if the US leadership and its bureaucracies have preconception against the regime, serious mistake in strategic coordination will arouse DPRK's suspicions of the United States' intention during the talk. Also, I think do not let emotional factor interfere with the dialogue. Very important reason for the failure of US-DPRK talk is both sides believe the other side is cheating. Each failure of talk hurts the feeling of the working team. And if the talk is carried out with emotion, it will inevitably return to the old conception of being deceived again. And last not least, do not create or build incident to raise up the intention during the talk, such as human rights issue. I think DPRK really like to talk about the human rights issue in the academic level. And so the country should give them specific suggestion to the human rights. They like to hear about that, not just insulting the party or the leader. So always they know there's a problem on human rights. They accept that, and they realize they want to change the human rights issue, but they really want to hear the specific suggestion. That's how to social management, how to do the corruption issue. So if we can give them specific suggestions they like to hear, right now it's on the academic level. And now COVID-19 is playing a very long-term role in formulation of national security strategy of DPRK. Planning of economic development and social changes also profoundly affect the world outlook of policy makers among the leadership of DPRK. So under the epidemic and the economic difficulties, DPRK has turned into more conservative and isolated, which is reducing her willingness to engage in talk with the outside. In addition to humanitarian assistance from China and Russia, DPRK has been more reluctant on engaging with the United States and ROK. So DPRK has to consolidate its regime, unifying the people and raising up the new level of anti-West propaganda. And right now, the next point I want to talk about is the China-US relationship. And I think China-US relationship is getting worsened, and it seriously affects the Korean Peninsula situation. First one, and the DPRK already defined the international relations as a new Cold War. And Kim Jong-un made a speech last year and defining this international relations as new Cold War. I think Kim Jong-un probably is the first and the only one leader in the world that talk about this international relations as new Cold War. And he talks to the all party and the people. And I think the foreign policy of North Korea, the DPRK, will follow this new Cold War thinking. This is, I think this is a reflection from the China-US relationship. And second one is the difficulty for China and US to cooperate on Korean Peninsula issue. And during the China-US high-level Alaska talk, the US side has included Korean nuclear issue in the list of cooperation. This issue is a major security concern of United States, who knows China's involvement and the cooperation is crucial to its resolution. But with the Biden administration defining China as a main competitor and doing its at most the content policy, whether China can continue to cooperate on denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, in what way and what concrete deals is a question China has to ponder carefully. In particular, if the United States uses DPRK nuclear issue as the excuse to strengthen its military presence on the peninsula and in the region to consolidate the US, Korea, Japan military alliance, it will certainly lead a serious rise in China-US differences over Korean Peninsula policy and growing suspicion of each other's strategy. And so I have some suggestions for the opening the talk with DPRK. So if the denuclearization is not a realistic goal on the short term, the parties should maintain the atmosphere of talk. First one, keeping the UN sanction on DPRK, encouraging the promotion of two-Korea relationship, and conducting discussion on assistance of DPRK, on the environment protection, public health system, and the medical system, especially agriculture. And the multilateral approach should be restarted. The multilateral approaches are not the second version of 60-party talk. First one, the participation of DPRK should be required. And second, during the multilateral approaches, DPRK's concerns should be considered, avoiding the situation of multi-parties versus one party. And third, the role of the third party should be limited. The interest of the affairs of the third party should not be involved into talk, just focus on the denuclearization. For example, the abduction issue or human rights issue should go into another talk. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다. 이로써 다섯 발표자의 발표가
Thank you very much. With that, we've heard all 5 presentations.
질문이 있으시거나
Now, if you have any questions or comments,
이 실내에 계신 분들은 손을 들어주시면
please feel free to raise your hand if you are in this room, and we will hand you the microphone. Please identify yourself first and ask the question.
지금 온라인으로 접속하신 분들께서도
Now, if you are watching this
이용하셔서
online, please use the QR code that is provided to you
대신
to submit your questions, and I will deliver that to our panelists.
지금 이제 시간이 한 30분 정도 남았는데
We have about 30 minutes left,
자연스럽게 의견이나 질문 주시면
and
감사하겠습니다.
please feel free to ask any questions you may have or give us your comments.
Yes, go ahead.
So I'll just give the audience a chance to think of a question, but I have a couple of reactions. The first is I agree entirely with Nishino-san with regard to the trilateral relationship. I think that though it may not be something that is welcomed by China, the improvement in U.S.-Japan, Korea relations is I think absolutely critical to dealing with the North Korea issue, whether it's dealing with it in terms of deterrence or whether it's dealing with it in terms of diplomacy. This year is going to be the 20th anniversary of the Pyongyang Declaration. And on the diplomacy side, it seems to be any sort of deal with North Korea is not possible without cooperation from Japan as well, and the Pyongyang Declaration was sort of an outline for that. Second point is Dr. Yang spoke about the whole issue of trust in the relationship, or the lack of trust in the relationship with North Korea. And I mean, I would say, I agree, and I would say part of the reason that trust is so missing right now is, I would say it's in part a legacy of the Trump and Moon years, in the sense that from North Korea's perspective, they really believed what the President Moon said to them about Trump. And they really believed that they were going to get a deal in Hanoi. And when that did not happen, I think it makes it very hard for the North Korean leadership to authorize re-engagement again, because they feel like they were lied to, that they were cheated, that they were embarrassed in February 2019. So I think, so part of this whole issue of trust building, I think, also goes back to the efforts that were made during the Moon and Trump years, which were dramatic efforts. They were really, they're really big efforts. And the thing about summits is that they can either succeed spectacularly or they can fail spectacularly. And clearly they failed. And we're still working through that. I think the North Koreans are still working through that. And then the third point is what you said, Christina. I think if you look at the Audacious Initiative, to me, what's interesting about it is that it seems to have elements of both the so-called Peace and Prosperity Initiative, as well as the sort of more traditional hardline U.S. initiative, in the sense that it still focuses and returns to CVID, or something about, complete verifiable denuclearization. But at the same time, it says very clearly South Korea has no desire to take North Korea by force. And it also says that sanctions lifting is possible if North Korea shows a commitment to denuclearization. Now, my understanding of what that means, and it could be wrong, is that it's saying that basically if North Korea just comes back to talks, there's going to be a willingness to look at sanctions lifting, which is, in many ways, that's much farther than the United States and South Korea have gone in the past. So, the audacious initiative seems to combine both the hardliners and the softliners. And then finally on China, I think Professor Nanli may disagree, but I don't get a sense that China is cooperating right now on North Korea in the context of an effort to restart diplomacy with the United States to try to achieve denuclearization. I think China has restarted trade with North Korea. We see it from satellite imagery on the border that trade has restarted, which is really not going to increase the incentives for North Korea to engage with the United States. If anything, it'll decrease the incentives. The proposal I have here is that I think if China is seeking to increase trade and assistance to North Korea, it should be in the context of denuclearization, or it should be, these things should be a part of how North Korea is compensated for freezing facilities, for freezing testing, these sorts of things. To me, that would be cooperating with the rest of the countries to try to achieve something that would be useful for both the United States and China when it comes to stopping this campaign that North Korea is now on with regard to testing.
네, 두철 교수님 감사합니다. Yes.
Thank you very much. Now Professor Nishino.
하나 코멘트 하나 질문을 드리고
I have one comment and one question.
코멘트는 저도 고민을 하는데
So regarding my comment,
2018년
in
6월
2018 June,
존중하고
we said that we will respect the Singapore Declaration, and it will be very good if we can respect the spirit of the Singapore Summit. But if you look at the joint statement, it actually references the Panmunjom Declaration as well. So in that case,
작년에 그 바이든 문 정상회담에서
during the Biden-Moon summit last year, in the joint statement they said they would respect the spirit of the Singapore summit. But if you look at the Yoon's administration,
시작을 할 수 있을지
would it be able to implement its initiative based on that same spirit? So meaning that would Mr. Yoon be able to build upon what Moon had achieved in his administration? I would like to say probably not.
18년 6월에 전신으로 돌아갈 수 있으면 좋겠지만
So of course it would be good if we can return to the spirit of the Singapore summit, but I am very pessimistic about that. That's my first comment. And I have a question for Professor Cha. If North Korea conducts the 7th nuclear test, what will be the consequences? So the Biden administration is less and less interested in North Korea, is what we say. So amidst this situation, if the 7th nuclear test occurs, I think that we can think about two extreme scenarios. First is that by conducting a nuclear test, we can see that the brinkmanship diplomacy becomes successful, so that Biden administration suddenly becomes engaged in the negotiation, in the dialogue. Or the second scenario is that, Biden administration is not interested, so why don't we leave it up to, Yoon's administration to take care of it. But if Yoon's administration has to take care of it, then it will take a more hardline stance against North Korea. So the first potential scenario is, going for active dialogue, so that there will be more reconciliation. Second is the extreme opposite case, where we become more hardlined and things get worse. So, Professor Cha, if the seventh nuclear test does occur, what kind of scenario do you think would unfold? And what kind of path, direction should we take going forward, the desirable path for everyone? Thank you.
I'll just respond quickly. I mean, I think it's a very good question. I think, and my answer is that I think it's not one or the other. I think it's both, in the sense that I think if there's a seventh nuclear test, the Biden administration will have to respond. And that could be through new deployments of assets in the region or on the peninsula. It could be more sanctions, and it could also be action in the UN if Moscow and Beijing are willing to support such action. Now, given the current situation in both U.S.-China relations and U.S.-Russia relations, I don't have high hopes that Beijing and Moscow will support a UN Security Council resolution on a seventh nuclear test, as they have done on the other nuclear tests. Nevertheless, I think that there will have to be a reaction from the United States that includes having something to do with assets in and around the peninsula. That would probably have to do with more exercising sanctions and a UN Security Council resolution. Having said that, I think that we have seen historically this also, after these sorts of crises, we also start to cycle back into diplomacy to avoid the crisis getting ratcheted up. And so I think that will be politically difficult for both the Biden and the Yoon administration, as well as Kishida administration, to do that. But I think in the end, because all parties have been waiting now for almost 2 years for North Korea to respond to all these dialogue initiatives, they will have no choice but to eventually engage if the North is interested, if the North is interested in engaging. And like I said, I think that's going to be sequential. That will be the sequence. So I think it'll be both, not one or the other, but both.
Professor Dr. Lee, would you like to also comment?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just have a comment and on the cooperation between China and the US. And definitely I think right now it's very hard for China and US to have serious cooperation on Korean issue. But actually I think China still keep the main UN sanction against North Korea, especially to the material, to the heavy industry, and the financial regulations. And North Korea really wants the heavy industry in development. It's called the crucial industry for their national strategy. And China still keep that sanction and very strongly. And also, even North Korea made the ICBM this year, and China still have the new regulation inside China. And so this doesn't mean China not support the US sanction. And also, I think China still sending the message to US that China will have a US cooperation on North Korean nuclear issue. And also, I think China right now China and the US should still have to fit in that environment, that how we can cooperate also competition. And right now, China officially reject to use competition to define the relationship. And I think China and both countries will familiar with this environment, and finally we can have the cooperation. And before that, I think China still will keep the UN sanction against North Korea. This is no doubt, because denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is still a very clear goal in China. And so that the UN sanction will not change. This is the first thing. And second thing is, I think I just said DPRK right now define the international relations as a new Cold War, and he really think he joined this camp, and they think all the conflict or the crisis will bring the great powers into this area. That's why I think first one, DPRK will have a serious coordinate with China and Russia. And second one, I think DPRK still like to stabilize the Korean Peninsula because they don't want the great power to fully involve in this Korea Peninsula issue. So this, I think this is DPRK's current logic right now.
Thank you. 자, 그러면 혹시 이제 플로어에서
Thank you very much. Now we will take comments and questions from the floor.
대사님하고 그다음에
The ambassador at the front and also the lady at the back. We'll go in that order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the excellent participants in today's fascinating discussion. My name is David Ellis. I am the British ambassador to North Korea. Currently, I'm working from London because, of course, the DPRK has closed its borders, but we hope to get back as soon as possible. I learned a great deal from the discussion today. It appears there's a consensus amongst all of the participants that we need to restart dialogue with North Korea, but there appears to be less consensus on what we should actually talk about or what we can talk about with DPRK and what is the purpose of those talks. So if you could imagine that you were the ambassadors in Pyongyang writing back to your capitals, what would you recommend as the entry point for restarting discussions with DPRK, which would have a reasonable reasonable chance of success? Thank you.
So imagine yourself as ambassador in Pyongyang, writing back to your president or prime minister. Anyone? Dr. Cha?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. And I think the answer is not necessary. Anybody who's familiar with the history of these negotiations, the answer is not anything that will be particularly surprising in the sense that the entry point, so I mean, so I think the entry point, again, if we're thinking most likely after a 7th nuclear test and after a round of sanctions and exercising and all these other things, the entry point could be could start with humanitarian because you know, their food situation is not good, their health situation is not good. So most likely the first point would be humanitarian and food, which could be unconditional because both the South Korean government and the U.S. government have stated that that sort of support is not dependent on denuclearization. We actually hosted the Assistant Secretary Dan Crittenbrink at CSIS, where he in a speech said for the United States, food and medical assistance is not contingent on denuclearization. The UN administration has said the same thing, so I think that would probably be the first place. And then after that, I mean, the audacious initiative implies that once North Korea commits to coming back to talks, it's not even clear if it means they have to be back at talks, but commits to coming back to talks, then the Yun government would look at lifting some sanctions. Now, the sanctions most likely that the North Koreans are interested in, that they want lifted, are the ones that were talked about in 2019, which is the 2016-2017 sanctions on general trade. Personally, I don't think those have to be all lifted at once. They could be done in a layered approach, starting with seafood or starting with textiles or whatever it might be. There could be a snapback clause as well. So I think that there's a pretty good set of things that could be put on the table to bring them back. And then in terms of the denuclearization part, again, it's not satisfying. As someone who's been through these negotiations, is not satisfying to say this, but you would have to, again, as Professor Shin said, start all over again. So start with a freeze at Yongbyon, monitoring, hopefully get to define Yongbyon much larger than the way it has traditionally been defined, simply around the 5 megawatt reactor, but define it more broadly than that. And then try to make, personally, I would also try to open a separate but connected missile negotiation, since we really haven't done that since the Clinton years. And it's very clearly their programs have developed quite a bit since the Clinton years. So that would sort of be the way I'd look at some of the specifics of it. Again, not very new or interesting for anybody who's studied or been in these negotiations, but unfortunately, that's where we are.
Any entry point for negotiation, Dr. Lee? Your thought? No? Yes.
네, 아까도 말씀드렸습니다만은
As I said
일본의
before,
안보 전문가로서는 소수파에 아마 속하지만
as a Japanese security expert, I am of the minority group, but in 2018, I am reminded by what Kim Jong-un said at the time, that is the Yongbyon facilities, even though it's not safe, they need to be declared and monitored and verified. I think that could be the starting point, and of course verification will be done by IAEA and also the experts, nuclear experts from the US. So once that is done to a certain extent, then we can also offer a certain level of lifting sanctions. And as for Punggye-ring testing facilities, at the time, North Korea actually exploded the facilities, and there are also new movements being spotted in that site. But as I said in my introductory remarks, it is very important for us to make North Korea stop using its nuclear power and stop expanding its nuclear power.
Mr. Yang? Yes. So basically, no matter what type of approach that we have taken, North Korea has always managed to find its way out. So the explosion at the Punggye site, I'm pretty sure that North Korea already had in mind that reconstruction would be done in a fast manner. So yes, the entry point or starting point is great. It's a great idea, but deception will always be in North Korea's calculus. And from the point of view of North Korea, is there really a true motivation for North Korea to engage in denuclearization talks? This is not the best idea, but pressurizing North Korea, in other words, making North Korea feel that they must come to the denuclearization talks, it might be important. So North Korea has tactical nuclear capability, meaning that it could strike Korea, South Korea, or Japan. Now, then we need to keep North Korea in check by having the same tactical nuclear weapons. But with our alliance with the United States, our tactical nuclear capability is only possible through, let's say, for example, NATO's aerial strike, for example. So if we or to keep North Korea in check with the same tactical nuclear capability, we need to have the planes fly from the United States, which will take a long time to reach the Korean peninsula. So, for North Korea to feel the real threat, whether it be a nuclear armament or other measures, we would need to redeploy tactical nuclear capability on the Korean peninsula. This is just an idea, but it's an option. Thank you for sharing your opinion. I think we did have another person who raised her hand. Lady over there.
My name is Yoon-hee Kim of National Democratic Institute Seoul office, and thank you very much for your great discussion. And my question is related to human rights and denuclearization, and I'm very pleased to hear Professor NISHINO Junya brought this up. And I know that Professor Cheol have advocated for putting human rights, integrating human rights into denuclearization agenda. However, some people say that just the mere mention of North Korean human rights issues would make North Korea regime offensive. And that is why the Moon administration put it on the sideline to keep more the diplomatic space with North Korea. So my question would go to anyone who would like to share your thoughts and opinions. If North Korea knows that the North Korea human rights issue is included in the denuclearization negotiation agenda, still North Korea regime would come to the negotiating table. Thank you very much.
So I think it's a very good question. I did want to mention that when I had my second time to intervene, but I'd forgot it in the list of things. As your question suggests, the conventional wisdom on this is that human rights should not be raised with North Korea because it will hurt the denuclearization negotiations. But as your question suggests, there is a different way of thinking about this, which is that if sanctions lifting, as desired by North Korea, is for the purpose of leading to more trade and even investment in North Korea, that is not possible as long as there are these horrible human rights violations in North Korea. It's not possible for U.S. companies by U.S. law or other companies by U.S. law to be investing in North Korea with these horrible human rights violations. So, in fact, if the United States actually raises human rights as a part of the denuclearization negotiation, that's actually a sign of commitment, because it means that the United States wants to see human rights abuses addressed such that U.S. companies then could engage and invest in North Korea. So I see it as actually a sign of credibility that the United States is serious about negotiating a new relationship with North Korea, rather than seeing it simply as some tactical thing that is meant to throw a wrench into the denuclearization negotiations. It would be hard for any country, United States, Japan, European countries, to build factories, to invest in North Korea when you have these human rights abuses along the supply chain. It's just not possible to do it, I think, in most cases. Even if the U.S. president said, as President Trump did say, all you companies can go in now, they can't. Under U.S. law, they can't go in. So there is actually a direct connection between what North Korea wants from the lifting of sanctions and the human rights issues that can't be ignored in a denuclearization deal.
네, 아까도 간략하게 말씀을 드렸습니다만은 저는
about
그
this
케이커 문제,
before,
인권 문제,
but when it comes to
그
denuclearization
모두
and human
되도록이면
rights issues,
통합적인
I believe that we have to
그
take an
전략을
integrated
구상하는
approach
게
in
좋다고
dealing
생각을
with these
합니다.
issues.
지금 차 선생님이 약간 말씀하셨지만
As Dr. Cha
인권
just said,
문제 같은 경우는
when it comes to
오히려
human rights
그
issue,
유럽 나라들은
the European
케이파도 당연히
countries
관심이
are
있지만은
also
critical
interested
engagement의 그
in
하나의 척이 인권 문제라고 저는 알고 있습니다.
denuclearization, but one of the critical pillars of their engagement is related with human rights. And that is why if we deal with the human rights issues, then we can actually expand the scope of dealing with North Korean issues in the international community. And when it comes to Biden, Kishida, and Yoon's administration, the direction for foreign policy is very much based on universal values like democracy and human rights and so forth. So that is the commonality that cut across all the foreign policies. So when we deal with North Korea, we should also deal with human rights issues because that is the underlying universal value. We should actually deal with North Korea as a package, including the human rights. And nuclear does not want to denuclearize. It does also not want to talk about human rights issues. But I think that we have to take an integrated approach in dealing with the human rights issues when it comes to North Korea.
Any comment? You have any comment on this? Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. Actually, I don't think the human rights issue should be going to the denuclearization talks. And you can see the balloon right now, this event, and Kim Il-jung criticized ROK using balloon to spread the coronavirus. And also the Russian ambassador to North Korea saying, I think they had sending message to the world, if the ROK will not using balloon, and probably will can stabilize the two Korea relationship. And I think the thing is, the human rights issue, just like China and the US have the dialogue mechanism on human rights issue in the past. And first one, China should accept this dialogue mechanism first. And also China, US fund a platform to talk about the human rights issue. But North Korea is different. North Korean, there's a core interest. North Korea always saying the dignity, and they think the human rights issue is harm their core interest, the dignity, and so they're very suspicious on the political intention. Those countries who use the human rights issue to insult the North Korea dignity. So that's why they think the human rights issue is equal to the topping down the regime. So I think it's not appropriate time right now to talk about the human rights issue with North Korea during the denuclearization talks. And also human rights issue is very complicated. And China and DPRK has different thinkings on logic on human rights issue. For example, they have a social class struggling theory. They think this is the people, some people is called the enemy. Of course, they have to treat the enemy bad. And so that's why until they find the new idea or new logic, new theory, and then we can find the platform with North Korea on the human rights issue, then they can talk about it. That's why I think on this issue, China and North Korea should have the dialogue on the academic level. When I visit the North Korean academic institution, they like to talk about the human rights issue. They want to they show me the evidence, and they think China and the Chinese scholars should give them specific suggestions. For example, how to do the corruption and how to do the social mismanagement. So this is related to the human rights issue. So when we talk about the human rights issue, we have to clearly deep research on what the North Korean society right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this nicely brings to an end of this session. I really would like to express our gratitude to all those panelists for their wonderful, participation and great wisdom and sharing their insight. So please join me, with a big round of applause for those panelists present. Thank you very much.
네, 그럼 이상으로 세션 2-1을 마치도록 하겠습니다. 다음 세션은 오후 4시 10분.
Next session will begin at 4:10 p.m. So please come inside the event venue 10 minutes prior and take your seats. Thank you.